You might not realize this, but some of the most important meals in American history have completely vanished from our kitchens. These weren't just recipes, they were lifelines. Dishes born during the Great Depression and wartime America, when survival depended on stretching every crumb, every scrap, and every ounce of creativity. And today, I'm going to bring those forgotten meals back to life. Trust me, if you stay with me until the end of this video, you'll discover recipes so unique, so deeply tied to survival and family traditions, that you'll walk away feeling like you've uncovered a secret piece of history. Picture the 1930s, the economy had collapsed, shelves were bare, and yet families gathered together around bowls of Hoover stew or slices of mock apple pie, desserts made without apples at all. These meals weren't about luxury, they were about hope. They reminded struggling families that even when money was gone, love and resourcefulness could still fill the table. Then came World War II, and ration books changed the way America ate. Meat, sugar, and even coffee were scarce. Out of necessity came clever recipes like Victory Garden soups, stretchable casseroles, and even substitute coffee made from chicory. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept people going. These recipes told stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the unbreakable spirit of everyday families. What makes these forgotten meals so powerful is not just the taste, it's the memory. They connect us to grandparents and great-grandparents who lived through times tougher than most of us can imagine. And today, I want to share them with you, not as old, dusty recipes, but as living history. So grab a seat, stay with me until the very end, and let's step into the kitchens of the past. Because once you see these 10 forgotten wartime and Depression-era recipes, you'll never look at food the same way again. And hey, if you love uncovering hidden traditions, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thought. Imagine walking into your grandmother's kitchen in the 1930s and smelling the warm spice of cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, only to find out the secret ingredient wasn't milk, butter, or even fresh eggs. It was a can of tomato soup. Yes, tomato soup cake may sound like a prank, but for families living through the Great Depression and World War II, it was a clever and beloved dessert. The origin of this cake goes back to the early 20th century, when canned goods were becoming staples in American homes. By the 1930s and 40s, companies like Campbell's were promoting tomato soup as more than just a quick meal. It was advertised as a baking ingredient. Housewives, often faced with rationing and empty pantries, discovered that tomato soup added moisture, color, and a subtle tang to cakes, all without needing milk, butter, or too many eggs. The result? A moist, spiced cake that tasted a lot like carrot cake, only without the carrots. Families often topped it with a simple powdered sugar glaze, or if they were lucky, a bit of cream cheese frosting when supplies allowed. Some even sprinkled it with raisins or walnuts to stretch it further, creating a dessert that felt rich when everything else felt scarce. But this cake wasn't just about flavor, it was about hope. A single can of soup transformed into something sweet and comforting, reminding families that even in hard times, joy could be baked from the simplest things. Parents served it at birthdays, church socials, and Sunday dinners, often with a smile, because it looked and tasted like a treat, without revealing its secret ingredient to the kids. Today, tomato soup cake has almost vanished from our tables, remembered mostly in old cookbooks and family stories. Yet for those who lived through its time, it was more than just dessert, it was proof that resilience and creativity could turn even a can of soup into a celebration. Picture a time when lemons were too expensive, fresh fruit was hard to find, and sugar had to be stretched like gold. Yet somehow, families in rural America still managed to enjoy a tangy, custard-like pie with a bright flavor. The secret? Vinegar. Yes, vinegar pie was once a beloved dessert across the South and Midwest, turning pantry basics into something that felt almost elegant. This recipe dates back to the 19th century but became especially popular during the Great Depression and wartime rationing. Housewives learned to mimic the taste of lemon pies, which were considered a luxury, by whisking vinegar with eggs, sugar, butter, and water. When baked, the mixture set into a silky filling with just enough acidity to trick the taste buds into thinking you were eating lemon custard. It was sometimes called poor man's lemon pie, but for families who had little else, it was nothing short of a miracle. What made vinegar pie so meaningful wasn't only its flavor, it was its practicality. The ingredients were shelf-stable and cheap, making it possible to serve dessert even when the orchard was bare or the store shelves were thin. Farmers' wives often relied on it during winter months when fresh produce was impossible to find. Some recipes even added a sprinkle of nutmeg or cinnamon on top, giving it a warm, home-style finish. For many children of that era, vinegar pie became tied to Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings. The tartness balanced the sweetness just enough, making it a memorable taste of resilience. Even if guests didn't know the secret ingredient, the pie still felt special, proof that love and creativity mattered more than luxury. Today, vinegar pie rarely appears on American tables. But back then, it symbolized resourcefulness in its purest form, a reminder that when times were tough, families didn't give up dessert. Instead, they found a way to sweeten life with whatever they had. Imagine serving a pie that looked just like the classic pecan pie, rich, golden, and full of crunch, only to reveal that not a single pecan was inside. Instead, the secret ingredient was something far more humble: saltine crackers. Known as mock pecan pie, this dessert became a Depression-era trick that fooled the eye and satisfied the sweet tooth when real nuts were simply out of reach. The idea was born during the 1930s and continued into the World War II years, when rationing made luxury items like pecans almost impossible for most families to afford. Cooks discovered that when saltine crackers were crushed and baked in a sugary syrup of eggs, butter, and vanilla, they softened yet held their shape, creating a texture that remarkably resembled pecans. With the addition of a little brown sugar or molasses, the flavor deepened into something close enough to pass for the real thing. What made this pie so brilliant wasn't just the deception, it was the comfort it gave. Families who couldn't imagine a holiday table without pie could still enjoy something familiar. Children often had no idea they weren't eating pecans, and many adults admitted they preferred the mock version because it was lighter, less expensive, and easier to make. Like many Depression recipes, saltine cracker pie carried a message of resourcefulness. It showed how creativity could transform something as ordinary as a cracker into the star of the table. Served at church suppers, family gatherings, and even Christmas dinners, it reminded everyone that a sense of tradition could be preserved, even when the pantry looked bare. Today, this pie is nearly forgotten, though a few Southern cookbooks and family recipe boxes still hold it as a treasure. For the people who baked it in hard times, it was more than dessert. It was proof that you didn't need wealth to share sweetness, you only needed imagination, determination, and a few crackers. Now, imagine biting into a warm slice of apple pie, flaky crust, tender filling, and that sweet tart flavor every American family adored, only to learn that not a single apple was used. Instead, the star of the recipe was something no one would expect: Ritz crackers. This clever creation, known as mock apple pie, became one of the most famous make-do desserts of the Depression and wartime years. The story begins in the 1930s, when apples were either too costly or unavailable in many parts of the country. But pie was more than just dessert, it was tradition, comfort, and a symbol of home. To fill that gap, inventive bakers turned to a surprising substitute. Ritz crackers, introduced in 1934, offered a buttery crunch that could mimic the texture of baked apples. When layered in a crust and baked with a mixture of sugar, water, cinnamon, and a splash of lemon juice, the crackers softened and transformed, tasting astonishingly like apple filling. Food companies quickly caught on. Ritz even published the recipe on their own boxes, proudly marketing it as a dessert so convincing that no one would guess the difference. And they were right, many children of that era grew up eating what they believed was apple pie, only to later discover it was made from crackers. But mock apple pie was more than a trick, it was a statement of resilience. Families who couldn't afford fresh fruit could still bring a pie to the table, keeping traditions alive in the hardest times. At church suppers, potlucks, and Sunday dinners, it reminded people that ingenuity could turn scarcity into celebration. Today, the idea of baking a pie without apples feels almost unbelievable. Yet for those who lived through the Great Depression and rationing years, mock apple pie wasn't just dessert. It was a reminder that even when life took away the simple things, families found a way to recreate joy, and sometimes, even fooled the taste buds along the way. At first glance, the words potato and candy don't seem like they belong together. Yet for many American families during the Depression and wartime years, potato candy was a sweet miracle that turned one of the humblest vegetables into a treat that felt almost magical. The recipe itself was simple, born out of scarcity. A single boiled potato, mashed smooth, was combined with powdered sugar to form a pliable dough. From there, it was rolled out flat, spread with a layer of peanut butter, and then carefully rolled into a log. Once sliced into pinwheels, the candy revealed beautiful swirls, soft and chewy, with a flavor far richer than its modest ingredients suggested. This clever confection likely has its roots in European immigrant kitchens, where resourcefulness was a necessity. But in America, it became especially popular during the Great Depression and later World War II. At a time when chocolate and expensive sweets were hard to find, potato candy offered something children could marvel at and families could enjoy without spending much at all. The potato provided moisture and binding power, eliminating the need for butter, milk, or eggs. It was a perfect example of making something out of nothing. For children, the fun came not just from eating it, but from helping to make it. Rolling the dough, spreading the peanut butter, and slicing the candy into colorful little spirals gave a sense of joy that carried far beyond the kitchen. Many families saved it for holidays or special occasions, when the table needed just a touch of sweetness to feel complete. Though it has largely vanished from modern cookbooks, potato candy still lingers in the memories of those who grew up with it. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't store-bought, but that was the point. In hard times, it stood as proof that even the simplest ingredients, with a little creativity, could become something unforgettable. When you think of fudge, you probably picture rich squares of chocolate, creamy and indulgent. But during times of scarcity, chocolate was a rare luxury. That's when resourceful home cooks turned to a surprising stand-in, carrots. Yes, carrot fudge was a Depression-era and wartime invention that turned a common root vegetable into a candlelight treat that children adored and families proudly served. The recipe was as clever as it was simple. Carrots were boiled until soft, then mashed and cooked down with sugar, butter, and sometimes a splash of vanilla. As the mixture thickened, it transformed into something sweet, smooth, and bright orange, often cut into squares and served just like traditional fudge. The natural sweetness of carrots provided the base, while the sugar and butter gave it the richness people craved but couldn't always afford from chocolate. Carrot fudge became especially popular in the 1940s, when World War II rationing made chocolate nearly impossible to buy for everyday families. Posters and pamphlets even encouraged using vegetables in desserts, praising carrots for their natural vitamins and sugar content. It was an example of how necessity and nutrition were woven together, turning humble produce into something both practical and fun. Children often loved it, not only because it was sweet, but because it felt special, like candy in a world where candy was scarce. For parents, it was a way to brighten a meal, offer a bit of joy, and sneak in some nourishment at the same time. Holiday tables and Sunday gatherings sometimes featured trays of carrot fudge alongside other make-do treats, proving that dessert could survive even the hardest years. Today, carrot fudge is nearly forgotten, overshadowed by its chocolate cousin. Yet for those who remember, it symbolizes more than thrift. It represents a time when families found sweetness in the simplest, most unexpected places. In every bright little square was a story of resilience, creativity. There was a time when prunes weren't just thought of as a health food, they were the base of one of the most elegant Depression-era desserts, prune whip. Light, airy, and almost cloud-like, this sweet dish turned something simple and shelf-stable into a treat that felt worthy of a celebration. The recipe itself was straightforward, yet magical. Prunes were stewed until soft, then pured into a smooth, dark paste. This was folded into whipped egg whites and sugar, creating a frothy mixture that baked into a delicate, soufflé-like dessert.
The end result was a dish that was both sweet and tangy, with a texture so airy it seemed to float on the spoon. Sometimes it was served with a drizzle of custard sauce or a dollop of whipped cream, if those luxuries were available. Prune whip gained popularity during the Great Depression and the wartime years because prunes were affordable, nutritious, and long-lasting in the pantry. They didn't spoil quickly like fresh fruit, and they were full of natural sweetness, making them the perfect ingredient for stretching scarce supplies. Families who couldn't afford fancy cakes or pies could still serve this dessert with pride, especially for Sunday dinners or holiday gatherings. What made prune whip special wasn't just its flavor, it was the sense of dignity it brought. Even in the hardest times, when meals were plain and portioned small, a dessert like this added a touch of grace to the table. For children, it felt whimsical and fun, while adults appreciated its thrift and nourishment. It was proof that dessert didn't need to be rich to feel rewarding. Today, prune whip has almost vanished from memory, replaced by more modern sweets. But in its day, it carried an important role, showing that even with the humblest ingredients, families could whip up something light, beautiful, and full of hope. As we've seen, these forgotten desserts weren't just recipes, they were survival stories, written in flour, sugar, and the most unexpected ingredients. From tomato soup turning into cake, to crackers masquerading as apples, to potatoes and carrots becoming candy, every dish we explored carried the same message: when times were hard, creativity and resilience filled the gap. For families in the Great Depression and wartime America, dessert wasn't simply about sweetness, it was about hope. It was proof that even in scarcity, joy could still be found at the dinner table. A slice of vinegar pie or a bite of prune whip may not sound extraordinary today, but for the children who grew up with them, those flavors are forever tied to the warmth of home and the strength of family. And that's the beauty of these recipes, they remind us that food is more than just sustenance. It is tradition, memory, and comfort, passed down through generations. Though many of these dishes have vanished from our kitchens, they live on in old cookbooks, faded recipe cards, and the stories of those who remember. They are a part of America's culinary history, preserved in the most unlikely of ways. Maybe you'll never bake a mock apple pie with Ritz crackers, or stir together a pan of carrot fudge. But knowing these recipes existed is like holding a window into the past, a glimpse of how people endured hardship with imagination and courage. And in that way, every forgotten dessert is still feeding us today, not with sugar or spice, but with the lessons they left behind. If you've enjoyed this journey through America's lost desserts, don't let it end here. Share this video with someone who loves history, nostalgia, or just a good story. And if you'd like to keep exploring these forgotten recipes and traditions with me, make sure to subscribe. Together, we'll keep the past alive, one recipe, one memory, and one story at a time.